Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund. Tonight on the Hinckley Report, Republicans gathered throughout the state to select new party leadership. Will these new leaders change the direction of the party? Will they continue to fight over Count My Vote? And what other major political issues are making headlines? Utah receives a visit from a high-profile presidential candidate. What did she say about public lands? How did Utahns react to her message? And money is starting to roll into campaigns at every level.
Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Michelle Quist, columnist with the Salt Lake Tribune, Brian Schott, managing editor for UtahPolicy.com, and Spencer Stokes, president of Stokes Strategies. So glad to have you all with us today. I want to jump right into some local politics. This is a big week for the parties, the Republicans particularly. Michelle, let's start with you. We had a couple of county conventions. Starting to look at the leadership that's going to emerge in the Republican Party. Tell us what's happening.
You know, the candidates for party offices and for state central committee, which are chosen at county conventions because they represent the counties, they are still having this argument about SB 54. There is still this division between candidates who support SB 54 and those who do not support SB 54. And so but it's only in their, this small little world of themselves, of the candidates. When they get to convention, they're not winning. The voters and the delegates from the counties and the state, they're tired of that argument. They really are.
It's interesting, Brian. I know you were watching this very closely too, but how divided are these two groups? And in terms of the Central Committee, which is what we're talking about, these 51 members that seem to be controlling that, what happened with that particular group? And talk about the dialogue back and forth.
Well, as we've reported extensively at UtahPolicy.com, they're known as the Gang of 51, or they're also known as Area 51. It's 51 members of the state central committee who signed a letter calling for, this was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, calling for an emergency meeting that they knew that a lot of people couldn't get to. So they would have a majority of this emergency meeting, and they tried to pass some rules that went against SB 54, the dual track system for nomination. And they've been trying to push this fight for a long time. They've lost a number of court cases. They recently lost their bid to have the case heard by the Supreme Court. And a lot of these gambits that they're using are simply to get another bite at the apple legally. They know that they don't have the votes in the legislature to overturn SB 54. That's not there. The political will is not there. So it's at least going to be in effect through the 2020 election. So they're trying to solve it through the courts. Even though the Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal, they still say, well, since they didn't rule on it, our argument is still valid. Which is an insane way to look at things, but this is a very small group who do not like this new way of candidates getting on the ballot because, and let's be honest here, they back candidates who, when more voters get a chance to weigh in on it, those candidates tend to lose. We saw it in the gubernatorial race. We saw it in the special election for the 3rd congressional district. More voters means more moderate candidates. Now, I'm not talking about down the middle moderate, but more moderate for the state.
They did win one case. They won the first case that closed the Republican primary, because SB 54 originally allowed non-affiliated and Republicans to vote in it, and that wasn't constitutional. What's interesting at convention, though, is that there are 2 proposals out to change the quorum status, the quorum number, so that 51 can't call a meeting together, because right now the number is 40. 40 people can call a meeting together.
So go ahead, Spencer.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say the thing I find most interesting and comical about this is that this very group of people who preach transparency, openness, and want and believe that government should be, the light of day should shine in, they're the group of people who are trying to muscle this through. And I think the current number last convention was 21 of those 51 have been replaced by new people. And you know, this took some time to kind of mature. You know, we all saw it coming right at the beginning when this shift happened, but you couldn't do anything about it because the craziness had not been exposed yet. But now that they have tried so many weird and bizarre things, it makes it very easy to go in and run a campaign against, look, is this really the Republican Party that our state has known and loved over the years?
I had one member of the legislature tell me the greatest argument against joining the Republican Party is taking someone to a state central committee meeting. What they have done is the rules of these meetings are so Byzantine, and they've been able to weaponize them. They've been able to use them to their favor because a lot of people don't show up to these meetings, you know, and politics is showing up.
I think you're right, Brian. And the reason they don't show up is because they drag it on. They make it miserable.
So long.
It took us 6 hours to approve the agenda at the last state Republican convention.
People who have something else going on, like a life, they don't want to go and sit there. And so I think after this is over, you'll see a group of people show up and try to get it back on track. I remember when I was the executive director of the Republican Party, it was the Saturday I dreaded the most, and it was 4 times a year, and you know, you'd walk in, you knew it was going to be ugly, you knew it was going to be all day, you knew that people were going to have their feelings hurt, you knew that you were going to have to stand out in the hall and help recover people. So the fact that it's matured to this point, and that you know, leadership of the state can now step in and say, look, we need to do something, is positive.
But the important thing is that they haven't talked about the fact that we lost a delegate seat, a federal office. The Republican State Central Committee since November hasn't talked about the fact that we lost a seat. They're not doing Republican Party things that people care about.
And that's a huge point, because one of the things that the party needs to do, the party exists to elect members of your own party, not to fight over the rules. And Ben McAdams won by 694 votes, and the Republican Party didn't do much, if anything, to support Mia Love. If there had been support from the party, you might have seen a different outcome. 694 votes is nothing.
They were too busy.
Yeah, they were too busy fighting.
So Spencer, talk about this, because some of it comes down to the leadership of the party. So it sounds like there has been a change in some of those 51.
Well, I've always said that the Republican Party is a three-legged stool. You've got the donors, you've got the elected officials, and you've got the grassroots, the delegates, the caucus attendees, the Central Committee members. And at any given time, all 3 legs of the stool hate each other. But what's happened now is that the donors have stopped giving, and the elected officials have had a hands-off approach to this until it finally blew apart. Now the elected officials and the donors are stepping in and saying, enough's enough, we've got to fix this.
And in 2020, the parties aren't going to be that big of a factor anyway. It's picks and packs in this state. You're seeing everybody forming either a pick or a pack, and that's where the political power is shifting to. The gatekeeper status of the party is gone.
Only because
of this fight.
actions.
And the donors have gone away. And the Republican Party, you know, Rob Anderson told me, they're still they're $100,000 in debt still. It's going to cost him $50,000 to put on the state convention. He's got $10,000 in the bank.
And
tell me.
As I've said on this show, the party right now is a party of one man, and that's Dave Bateman. And that is not what the Republican Party is known for.
And he's the one that's been financing the fights.
Supposedly, but they still have debt. So you can say all you want in the public about you're paying off the debt. Well, stroke the pen and write the check.
Well, and one of the main architects of this litigation committee, this subgroup of the State Central Committee that has been promoting constant litigation on SB 54, he did not win his bid for State Central Committee. So I think the tides are changing.
Okay, really quick on that, and the last point here too is, so we're gonna have to get a new party head for the Republicans, right? The state's gonna have to for the Republicans. What's happening there in that race?
Well, so Derek Brown is running against Phil Wright. Phil Wright has been, he was the lead of the Keep My Vote. Is it Keep My Vote?
Voice.
Keep My Voice.
Keep My Voice.
You know, against SB 54. A woman named Sylvia Misk something is also running. It's really basically, the anti-SB 54 behind Phil Wright, just kind of, hitting at all times.
And turnout will determine this. Who shows up at the convention? And I think that's why you're seeing this big push of people need to come to the convention that day to solve this.
Okay, let's go to another big event that happened this week. And Brian, we'll start with you because you had a pretty close interaction here. Elizabeth Warren made a visit, which is interesting. This is our third presidential candidate that's visited the state of Utah already. Tell us a little bit about that event, because you went on a hike with her.
Yeah, she had an off-the-record press event up in Big Cottonwood Canyon. She came here to talk about public lands, conservationism, said that public lands are a big portion of the fight against climate change. She released a paper saying that on her first day in office, she would reinstate Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante and issue a moratorium on any new mining or drilling leases on public lands. That plays well to Democrats in this area. It doesn't play well with the Republicans out here. I'm not surprised that she came, because Utah has moved up into that Super Tuesday slot with a primary where they're with 13 other states. Now, we've only got 35 delegates, but there's 1,400 delegates up for grabs, and it's none of them are a winner-take-all, none at all. So she's copying a page out of Obama's 2008 playbook, where he went to smaller states that didn't have Democratic majorities to try and gain some inroads there, because he was running against Clinton, and she was stronger in those big Democratic states, and that helped. There are going to be so many candidates out there, so many candidates surviving beyond the first 4 states, that it's really a smart move, and we'll see more and more of those candidates come here.
Michelle, talk about what significance that is, because I want to talk about what Elizabeth Warren talked about, but the significance of moving up the day to the Super Tuesday.
Yeah, and it moved because the legislature passed legislation that put that the state is now sponsoring the presidential primary for both parties. It was very significant for the Democrat Party, especially because they have a hard time funding it. Both parties had issues last presidential primary, but last time the Republicans decided to do it at caucus night. They had problems, but not as extensive as the Democrat Party.
Well, it was online too.
Yeah, we had it online, and we had a little more people to manage the crowds that come out. And so this legislation really is, the state's going to pay for it, and we're now relevant. We're also relevant because Ben McAdams was elected, and so Democrats are seeing, maybe Utah makes sense to visit, and I think it's good.
Who knew that guns, abortion in the state of Utah was going to be the national touchstone, that you could come here and campaign about public lands, and people would. This is one of the things that really bugs Republicans, and especially people who live in rural Utah, that we are the pawn in the Democratic National Party's politics. This whole designating national park, or not national parks, but wilderness and monuments, and that we become the pawn to that. And that really is annoying to those of us who think we should have some rights in the state.
But how did this message from Elizabeth Warren resonate with Utahns? Because it went right at these two issues, right? Grand Staircase and Bears Ears and drilling.
Well, I don't know that there's been any polling done yet, but I can tell you that I don't think it's going to resonate.
There just aren't that many Democrats, but at least they're in the right state this time. They're not in Arizona talking about Utah parks or so.
So I wonder if that's kind of the point a little bit, because it's interesting if it's not really for Utah, who's it for?
It's for Democrats. That's who it was. This was not to win the state in 2020. That's not going to happen. This is to win the Democratic nomination, and you have to look at it through that prism. She's not trying to talk to Republican voters here. She's trying to talk to independents and Democrats who can vote in the Democratic primary.
And it's a national,
as well.
And right now, I think you see with what are we up to, 21? I don't know what the current count is on people running against Donald Trump, but right now you have a situation where Democrats are trying to out-Democrat each other. So it was genius on her part to come in and say, and she was the first one that said it, so she gets some play within the group for that.
Spencer, just take a moment as to why you see Utah. We have some changes to make us even more relevant, but why election after election, at least the last 2 cycles, why have we had so much attention from these candidates? Not just Republicans, but from Democrats too.
Well, I think the West, they're trying to look at it as a block. I think Utah has been a leader on Western issues. We have leaders in the United States Congress on Western issues. The governor is the longest serving governor. I mean, there's a lot of things, and if you can come here and win over Utah on Western issues, I think it reverberates in our neighboring states.
We're also really nice, so people come here, and even Republicans will be,
true, Michelle.
They'll be nice and they'll listen and civil, and there's not a lot of nasty stories that come out of visiting here.
Do you think with some of these changes, we're not really a flyover state anymore? We're kind of a stop-in state? Have we turned that corner?
Maybe just
We're
to
still
get
a
gas.
flyover state. We're still a flyover state when it comes to the election. This visit was 100% about the Super Tuesday primaries. You've got to do something to differentiate yourself. There are 19 candidates right now. Joe Biden has announced that he's going to, or he will make his announcement next week. It's a huge field. Not everybody is going to survive. If you look at some of the spending that Warren's done, she's spending a major amount of money on her campaign. She's trying to design this to last beyond the first 4 states, to last beyond Super Tuesday. That's what the strategy is right now. You're seeing candidates on that side catch fire and fade, catch fire and fade. Beto caught fire. So where is he now? No one's really talking about him. Now it's Mayor Pete. Elizabeth Warren's just kind of going along like this. I was at her speech. Democrats were electrified. She's very effective. She's a great speaker. It was a really good campaign speech. She knows what she's doing. It's going to be catching fire at the right time.
And we do. You notice I don't think she did a Democrat fundraiser while she was here, did she? Any private?
As far as I know, no.
Right, but Park City, we do have a strong funding base out of Park City, and I do think that you see them go to Park City, Democrats, to raise money.
Park City has been an ATM for the Democratic Party. In 2008, Obama came here, had a fundraiser in Park City, and then had a hastily called rally on the side of the road between Park City and Salt Lake City on his way to the airport because people wanted to see him. Hillary Clinton came here and raised money, but she sent her daughter in 2016 to campaign. Bernie Sanders had a huge rally here. I mean, it was big at this. This is the Place State Park. People were stretching for miles to get into that place. The fact that we are now moved up in the process and there are so many candidates, that's what gives us importance.
But if they continue to try to out-liberal each other, what you're going to end up with is a candidate on the fringe of the party and almost assuredly re-elects Donald Trump, because the nation is not there yet. We may get there, but they're not there in this cycle. And so if you end up with somebody who is to the very far left, it could be a problem.
Well, and we're still a flyover state, but there's still an opportunity there for Republican leaders in Utah to step up and respond to people who come here. There could have been somebody that responded to Elizabeth Warren, and they would have had an opportunity there to get press and kind of raise the esteem of Utah.
Let's talk about an issue that's going to have an impact on those races in the future. Big event this week. The Mueller report was released. All right, we've been waiting for this for a while. Some speculation from some what would go in. Michelle, your first reaction about what the report said? Oh,
my first reaction was I don't want to read this thing. It's so long, and
you didn't stay up all night?
It's for pundits. No, I mean, we're the only ones talking about it. I have not heard it from any of my friends or family, or it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal.
We need to give a big acknowledgement to Brian Schott here, who has read the entire Mueller report.
What? The whole thing.
Most of Thursday reading it, and yeah, it's pretty consequential. And my takeaway is it shows that the Russians tried massively to elect Donald Trump. Trump's campaign did nothing to reject that help, and he tried like heck to cover it all up. That's my takeaway from the whole thing. Is that going to matter in 2020? Probably not, because it's not going to change the minds of 35 to 40% of the nation. I was at a journalism conference last week. We were talking about how to cover the 2020 election. And one of the things that I took away from this is it's not our job as journalists to point out all the time Trump is lying, Trump is lying, Trump is lying. You know, it's not our job to be the arbiter of truth. It's our job to figure out why 40% of the country knows that. They know who he is, and they don't care. They still support him. We need to do more than sit on Twitter and fight about these things and go on social media, which is an absolute cesspool. I hate Twitter. That's a conversation that's not happening. If you look at what's happening in this election, maybe 20% of America is on Twitter. 2 million to 3 million people watch cable news. That is a fraction of the people who are going to be voting in 2020. They're not paying attention to this conversation at all.
So I thought the Wall Street Journal's coverage this morning was they actually ran every page and to show how much was redacted. I was a little surprised it wasn't more, but it is you pointed out 3 things that I think are absolutely important. But let me tell you what I think is the important thing here. The American public believed this stuff that was being peddled by Russia. They were peddling things on social media that on their face were not true. And then what was happening was people were picking them up and emailing them, forwarding them. I received an email with a long list of people from a state senator's wife who was clear. This email was clearly not factual. And I sent her an email back and said, this is not a factual email, and I gave her the reference to go check. And to her credit, she sent out a retraction to all of those people. But that was happening thousands of times across America, and people were believing it. They wanted to believe it.
That was so striking. The efforts by the Russian social media efforts were so effective. Millions of people saw this stuff, and they were able to weaponize it and use it to sow discord and disinformation. And people, we are so polarized as a nation, and this report came out and we all retreated to our corners. Imagine for a second if this report had come out and we didn't know anything in it. If we had just read it cold, everything that's in this report, it would be the biggest political bombshell in the history of the United States. A foreign country intervened in our election to elect a certain candidate, and that candidate accepted that help and then tried to cover it up. It would be the biggest bombshell. But since we've been fed this in a drip, 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 drip fashion, we've become numb to it.
Which is what had the Democrat leadership so upset that Barr held a press conference prior to the release of it to try to set the tone of the report being released.
Michelle, why do you think that's the case? So, we're talking mostly about, whether or not there was collusion, no collusion. We'll talk about the obstruction in just a moment. Why is it then that part that Brian and Spencer is talking about seems to be not the primary story?
1, because, we've had it dripped. 2, because people aren't on social media and haven't, it doesn't affect their daily lives. It's not, what they're hearing about. And 3, people hate negativity. They just want to hear positive things. They want to hear solutions, and this report doesn't have that.
Let me give you a quote from one of our members of Congress, from Chris Stewart, Michelle, and get a comment from you on this. Chris Stewart said, if they didn't bring an indictment, if they didn't bring specific charges against the president, then I think we need to protect that presumption of innocence. A statement of no exoneration does not imply guilt, but some people are reading it as if it implies guilt. We'll take away that they weren't going to be able to bring an indictment anyway.
Right.
But what about the rest of that?
I think he's in his corner, like Brian said. They went to their corners, and he wants to make sure that he's supportive of the Republican president. I don't think that's what a majority of Americans feel. They it doesn't smell right. They know something's wrong, and that what went on was not right.
This is a difficult thing for the National Democratic Party to deal with, because they've got an election coming up, and the problem is they know they don't want to. They know how polarizing this can be. The left wants them to bring it up and hold hearings and impeach, and they know that if they go too far down that road, it's only going to help his reelection.
This is going to be decided at the ballot box in 2020. That's what this is going to be. The Democratic House, they're going to keep investigating. This was a roadmap for them to investigate, and there's going to be a lot of embarrassing stuff that comes out. But impeachment is a political process. That's what it is, and they don't want to go down that road because, as you said, there's an election coming up. This thing's going to be decided at the ballot box.
But their base wants them to.
Oh, of course they do.
So I think that's a great point. So Michelle, so if the Democrats have to walk a tightrope, as they've just both said, how do they do it when so many people on the Democratic side are saying it's time for impeachment? Maybe make the case for why impeachment is not the best strategy.
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe it is.
Well, it's not, because it won't be successful. You know, they can't indict a sitting president, and so they just have to make the arguments of you know, about his moral turpitude and the fact that he tried to cover it up, and you know, all the things he was part of. You know, they're not right for a president to be part of. But you know, if they go for impeachment, you know, the other people in the other corner are just going to rise up.
Spencer, you've watched this for a long time too. Is impeachment a political winner historically?
No, it is not. I mean, we saw it with Bill Clinton. The Senate wouldn't convict. You had all kinds of, you know, the Republican Party. I remember going to a fundraiser with Henry Hyde, who was the chief prosecutor in the Senate, and he just said, "This is not we're not going to win on this, and it's just dragging us through the mud." So they've got they're, as a farmer friend of mine said, they're riding a barbed wire fence. I mean, there's nothing good that can come from them, and they know that, but their base wants them to do it.
They can fundraise.
They can fundraise, no question.
That can come
I got to
from
point
it.
out that there was a report yesterday from one of the poll reporters on the ground with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in Iowa, and they said that she had an event, took questions from like 50 voters. Not a single one was about the Mueller report. Voters they're not tuned into this. They realize it is such a partisan thing. And again, you know, we are so obsessed with cable TV and Twitter. The political media is obsessed with itself, and Twitter is not the place where these conversations
and you know
are
what
happening.
we say about it's 457 pages, something like that. No one's going to read it. It's just like at the legislature. If you want to pass a bill, have it be a really big bill. A 2-page bill has a more difficult challenge getting passed than a large bill. And Brian Schott is probably the highest 0.001% that's going to read that report.
Okay, well, I'm so glad you did that on our behalf. Thank you for that, Brian. Thank you for the very insightful conversation today. You've helped us understand these issues so much better. Thank you very much. Well, the conversation continues online, so please join us at kued.org/Hinckley Report for more discussions of this week's events. Thank you for being with us. Good night.